At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFI without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. Aiden Cross, an engineer, believed he could understand any system. This included the Thaxon Interspecies University cafeteria's baffling culinary system. Today's challenge was the caloric slurry dispenser, which offered a substance the color of a deep space nebula and the approximate consistency of regret. He prodded it with a spork. The slurry shuddered. Close enough, he muttered, guiding his tray towards an empty table. The cavernous room hummed with myriad life forms. Clicks, whistles, and the thrum of silicon-based conversations formed an ambient static he'd grown accustomed to. As the first human exchange student, he was the lone soft-skinned bipedal mammal in a sea of segmented armor, silicate hides, and fibrous pelts, a zoo exhibit required to take notes. He sat down, placing his worn satchel on the bench beside him, a canvas relic from Earth. The bag was held together by stubbornness and a flexible metal strap he'd salvaged from a derelict drone. He'd unzipped a small pocket and produced his secret weapon, a clear plastic shaker filled with crushed red pepper flakes. It was a little piece of home, a defiant spark of capsaicin, in a galaxy that seemed to favor bland, nutrient-optimized goop. With a few vigorous shakes, he coated the purplish slurry in a layer of angry red specks. He stirred it in, the familiar sharp scent, a small comfort. Across the cafeteria, Tella watched, her tri-point lenses tracking the human's ritual. She held a sleek black note recorder near her articulated vocalizer plates, her clinical voice audible only to her device. Her species, the Orpheans, resembled tall sculptures of polished volcanic glass. Laminated biomaterial formed their bodies, inlaid with fiber optic filaments that pulsed with cool light. Observation log, third shift. Subject, human, Aiden Cross. The subject has again selected caloric slurry, ochre variant. This supports the hypothesis that the human digestive system requires high levels of simple carbohydrates for its energy-intensive physiology. She paused, her slender body still. The filaments along her forelimbs brightened, signaling intense concentration. The human is now applying a particulate substance of Terran origin. Spectrometry from previous observation suggests an alkalamide neurotoxin consistent with the Terran genus Capsicum. The active chemical capsaicin is an irritant developed as a deterrent against mammalian herbivores. Her sharp triangular head tilted, her sensory filaments twitched. The subject willingly consumes a known chemical deterrent. Conclusion. Applying the irritant is a threat display, a declaration of resilience and capacity to endure pain. He is, in effect, seasoning his territory. Aidan took a bite. The welcome heat obliterated the slurry's blandness. It was tolerable. The familiar prickle of observation made him glance around. He met Tella's gaze for a fraction of a second, her focus steady as a targeting laser. He gave an uncertain wave. Tella's vocalizer plates clicked. The subject has noted my observation. He responded with a slow upper limb wave, a low-level greeting. The combination of threat display and social gesture presents a logical contradiction. Is he signaling a warning and benign intent simultaneously? The species is agonizingly contradictory. She lowered her note recorder, her focus unbroken. The human Aiden Cross presented a puzzle. Every data packet on solitary apex predators from high-gravity worlds pointed to a creature governed by instinct, aggression, and territorialism. Yet Aidan was a paradox, who sprinkled chemical deterrents on his food. Tella, top of her class, intended to solve them. She required more data, available only through direct interaction. Aiden, oblivious to his role as a living contradiction, finished his meal. He'd learned to ignore the stares. He'd overheard larval grillions whispering that humans could liquefy their skeletons to fit through small spaces. Another rumor suggested they communicated through subsonic frequencies that could shatter silicate structures. He looked forward to their next invention. He slung his satchel over his shoulder, the familiar weight of comfort, and headed for his next class, Xenobiology 201. The Xenobiology 201 lecture hall was a steep amphitheater, its benches filled with a dizzying array of life forms. The benches held briar pelts like grish, a friendly ambulatory hillock of mossy fur, and silicate petrons, whose slow movements sounded like grinding stone. Orpheans like Tella sat with shimmering plating that reflected the holographic displays. Aidan was a lone patch of pinkish beige in a tapestry of greens, blues, and greys. At the floor center stood Professor Talon Vore. He was a patron, ancient and massive. His former great petrified root system, the gnarled wood-like texture of his body absorbed light. He moved with the unhurried rhythm of geological time. Today he used he pronouns. A memo had informed the class that Petron gender expression was a seasonal phenomenon tied to planetary axial tilt, a detail Aiden found fascinating. "Settle?" Professor Vore creaked, the single word echoing with authority. The hall fell silent. "For many terms we have studied predator-prey dynamics. We have analyzed fossil records and debated the socio-biological imperatives of extinct species." His eyes were pools of dark, unblinking sap. "Theory, however, is but a shadow of the substance we will observe today." Students shifted, sensory appendages twitching. Tella Novan sat erect in the front row, her note recorder active, a bioscanner humming on the desk before her. She had triple-checked its calibration. Professor Vore gestured with a root-like limb, and a holographic image shimmered to life. It stood on 4 powerful reverse-jointed legs, its body corded muscle beneath overlapping razor-sharp plates. Smaller scythe-like arms were held close to its chest, while its primary limbs ended in claws that could shear bulkhead plating. Its head was a nightmare of armored bone and teeth, its eyes clusters of photosensitive pits. "The Gralnax of Vexos 4, Professor Vore stated. "A true apex predator, solitary, hyper-aggressive. It has no social structures beyond mating frenzies that end in cannibalism. It is, by all metrics, a creature engineered for killing." He turned his slow gaze towards the lone human. Every other student turned to follow. Aiden felt 100 pairs of eyes focus on him. He gave a weak smile. "The prevailing thesis, championed by student Novan," the professor continued, shifting his gaze to Tella, "posits that a territorial imperative is the singular driving force for all solitary apex predators hailing from high-gravity environments. Confronting a perceived rival should trigger an instinctual response that is immediate, measurable, and aggressive. A berserk state, to use the colloquial term from her paper." Tella's posture went rigid with anticipation. This was the culmination of her research. "Our human student, Aiden Cross," Professor Vore said, the title making Aiden feel like a microbe, "also hails from a high-gravity world. He is, by species definition, an apex predator. His biology supports persistence hunting, endurance, and physical resilience." He gestured to the empty chair on the lecture floor, bristling with biosensors. "Mr. Cross, if you would." Aiden swallowed. This felt less like a class than a public vivisection. He made his way down the steps. The room was so quiet he could hear his clothes whisper. He sank into the chair as automated arms affixed sensors to his temples, wrists, and chest. "We will now display live capture footage of a Gralnax during a territorial hunt," Professor Vore announced. "We will observe the human's physiological and neurological response. Student Novan, have you calibrated your scanner?" "Affirmative, Professor," Tella said, her voice tight. Excellent, Vor creaked. Begin the projection. Aiden took a deep breath. Okay, showtime. What was the expected reaction to a scary monster? He settled in aiming for composure. The lights dimmed, and the massive screen at the room's front flickered to life. The lab became a small theater. The massive view screen and glows from recording devices provided the only light. Aiden sat in the sensor-laden chair, a specimen pinned beneath the department's collective gaze, less a student than the co-star in a nature documentary. On the screen, the Gralnax exploded into motion. The creature was a blur of grey-green muscle and sharpened bone, a whirlwind of claws tearing through alien rock spires. It ripped apart a herd of six-legged grazers, its movements wasting energy on destruction. Worse was the sound, wet tearing, and the Gralnax's speech, a shriek that could strip paint from metal. Aiden watched, his expression neutral. One big, angry, stabby lizard, he thought. The claws were impressive, probably a carbosilicate composite. The biomechanics were inefficient, though. Too much lateral movement in the primary limbs would bleed momentum. Tella from her station monitored her readouts. Her bioscanner displayed Aiden's vitals. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. Slightly elevated, but normal. Adrenaline, negligible increase. Galvanic skin, response stable. Prefrontal lobe activity showed a calm, analytical mindset over a primal one. The other students had stopped watching the Gralnax. They trained their various sensory organs on the human, their note corders capturing his placid expression, filming the void where data should have been. On screen, the Gralnax let out a guttural roar over its final victim, asserting dominance over the blood-soaked clearing. Aiden felt a buzz from his pocket. He angled his body, pulling out his personal note corder. A message from his sister, Alina, showed a picture of a new dog, a golden retriever puppy named Neutron. He smiled faintly, typing back, "It looks like a fluffy potato. I approve." He stifled a yawn. The atmospheric purifiers in the lecture hall always made him a little sleepy. He put his device away, rubbing his eyes, and registered the silence. The Gralnax vanished from the screen, replaced by a frozen frame of its snarling face, but the room remained dark. He could feel every eye on him. He looked left. A row of Orpheans had their cameras trained on him. He looked right. Grish, the large briar pelt, was peering at him from behind his furry paws. He glanced at Professor Vor, whose lignified face was unreadable. At last he looked at Tella, whose vocalizer plates were slightly agape, clicking in confusion. Everyone was just staring. Aiden shifted uncomfortably. A creeping suspicion arose that he had missed some crucial instruction. A quiz? He cleared his throat. The sound unnaturally loud. He gestured at the Gralnax's frozen image. "Cool monster," he offered, his voice echoing slightly. He looked at the sea of recording devices, pointed at his face and frowned. "But why is everyone filming me?" Hey, if you're enjoying this story, please take a second and give us a like. The question hung in the silent air. Then the amphitheater erupted in a confused murmur as students began clicking and trilling to each other. Professor Vor raised a single, heavy limb, and the room quieted again. "The practical observation," he creaked, "has concluded. Class dismissed." The lights came up. Tella remained frozen at her station, staring at the bioscanner's mocking flat data stream as if it had personally betrayed her. Her elegant framework predicted a violent reaction, yet his vitals held steady. She received only a yawn. As Aidan detached the last sensor, Tella marched down the steps. She cornered him, planting herself in his path, her frame taut with frustration. "Explain your calm response," she demanded, an order for a data point she'd missed. Aiden blinked at her intensity. "My response to what? The video?" "Affirmative," she snapped. "Your physiological signs remain stable. Your hormonal levels flat. You exhibited signs of analytical thought instead of territorial threat assessment." Why did you suppress the instinct? Whoa, okay. First, there was no impulse to suppress, and second, it was just unimpressive. Tella's vocalizer plates hung open. The statement short-circuited her thought process. Failed to impress you? The Gralnax has an estimated bite force of 90,000 newtons. Its claws can eviscerate a light armored vehicle. Its aggression precludes any social bonds. How could it fail to impress you? It's just messy, Aiden explained, gesturing. It's big and strong, I get it. Top of its food chain, but its rage with little finesse. It wastes energy. On Earth, the dangerous predators, the ones you truly avoid, are different. They're smart and patient. A pack of wolves, a crocodile, even a wolverine. They restrain themselves. They think. They strategize. That thing, he nodded towards the screen, is a bully. A big, dumb, angry bully. He slung his satchel over his shoulder. Frankly, my Aunt Carol's chihuahua is scarier. At least Pep has a plan. It's a bad plan, mostly involving ankle biting. But it's a plan. Tella stared, her sensory feelers twitching furiously. She tried to fit his explanation into a framework, like fitting a star into a filing cabinet. His dismissal was a variable outside her calculations. She'd built her hypothesis on instinct, a biological imperative transcending conscious thought. For him to dismiss the threat implied choice, a contradiction in her model. Oh, this is a confounding anomaly, she hissed. Your calm is a deeply confusing data point. I require more testing. Before Aiden could ask what she meant, she turned and strode away. The rhythmic clicking of her vocalizer plate subsided as she regained composure. Aiden watched her go. More testing, he said to the empty air. That sounds ominous. He suspected his life as a lab rat was about to become much more annoying. Tella's unsanctioned experiments began the next day. She shifted from observation to proactive stimulus. She designed her first test to trigger a territorial food guarding response. Aidan was at his usual workstation in the university library, tucked in the exobotany section. He was deep in alien photosynthesis, cross-referencing Terran genomes with a new species from Glies 186F. Tella approached so silently. Her shadow falling over his notecorder was his first notice of her. He looked up to see her placing a small sealed container on his desk. A piece of synth steak sat inside, a high-grade cut, usually reserved for obligate carnivores. A gift, Tella stated flatly. She stepped back and began making notes. Subject has been presented with high-value protein source within his designated study area, monitoring for signs of possessiveness, scent marking, or hoarding behavior. Aiden stared from the synth steak to Tella. Thanks, he said, but I already ate lunch, and also we're in a library. The location is part of the stimulus, she replied, her gaze on her notes. An unexpected resource in a neutral territory. Aiden sighed. He could play this game. He picked up the container, walked to the nearest organic waste disposal unit, and dropped it in. The unit whirred, atomizing the steak. He walked back, sat down, and offered her a polite smile. Tella's vocalizer plates clicked, a sharp, frustrated sound. Subject has rejected the resource. Destroyed it. A display of resource abundance. A statement that he requires more than a meager offering. The complexity is inefficient. Her next attempt came 2 days later. Aiden walked down a crowded corridor, focused on a schematic for his engineering lab. As he passed a tall stalk of notecorders, Tella, hiding behind a support column, shoved them over. A thick textbook, Comparative Anatomy of Silicon-Based Gastropods, hurtled toward the floor, aimed to land less than a foot from Aiden. A classic Startle test. The sudden noise and motion should trigger a flight or fight response. The book hit the floor with a deafening crack. Dozens of students flinched. Aiden, however, stood his ground. He'd heard the book scrape the shelf before it fell. Time on construction sites with his father had given him an ingrained sense of his surroundings. He stopped walking, and the book landed harmlessly before him. When he looked up, his expression was neutral. He looked at the book, then at Tella, who was attempting a nonchalant pose. He bent down, picked up the heavy volume, and dusted it off. He walked over and handed it to her. "Careful," he said, his voice gentle. "You could have hurt yourself. This thing must weigh 20 kilos. A sharp, discordant chime sounded from her vocalizer plates. She snatched the book. His placid stance, his concern. He responded to a threat with an offer of aid, inverting the predator-prey dynamic. "My calculations were imprecise," she hissed before turning and stalking away, clutching the massive textbook to her chest like a shield. Aiden watched her go, a small smile on his lips. Her attempts were a ridiculous yet welcome distraction from his midterm on xenomorphic root systems. He adjusted his satchel and continued on his way, already re-immersed in his schematic. The note recorder cast a pale blue glow on Aiden's face, contrasting the warm bioluminescence of the alien plant on his desk. The plant, a Signian bloom, had delicate flowers that pulsed with a golden light, a living lamp he'd coaxed into thriving. He propped the recorder on a textbook stack, the screen showing his sister, Alina. "So," Alina said, grinning, "the giant opalescent space wasp lady is actively trying to scare you for science?" "That's the gist of it," Aiden confirmed, leaning back. "Yesterday she replaced the nutrient solution in my exofloral lab with a saline solution. Said she was testing my reaction to sabotage of a vital resource. I just flushed the system and mixed in a new batch. I think she was expecting me to try and bite her." Alina laughed, a warm sound that bridged the light years. "Oh, Aiden, you've always been a magnet for the weird ones." "Hey, Brenda was just ahead of her time," he retorted with a smile. "But this is different. They're thoroughly confused by me. They have this theory that because I'm from a high-gravity world, I should be super aggressive, territorial monster. They treat me like a bomb that forgot to go off. They're just wrong," he said with exasperated amusement. "Hilariously, fundamentally wrong. It's like their knowledge of water comes from books, and I'm the first they've seen go for a swim. They're trying to figure out why I'm not dissolving." "Well, are you?" Alina asked, mock serious. "Are you secretly dissolving, little brother?" "Only on the inside," he deadpanned. He picked up his note recorder and turned the camera to the Signian bloom. "Hey, check this out. I got the nutrient balance right. See the petals glowing? It's healthy." Passion filled his voice. "The biology's incredible, Alina. They use organelles that absorb ambient neutrino radiation, a completely different pathway for energy production. Imagine what we could learn from that." "Sorry," he said, turning the camera back to himself, cheeks flushed. "Rambling about science. Always be proud of it," she said warmly. "I love hearing it. It's good you're still you, even out there." She paused. "But are you okay? It must be difficult, being the only human for 100 light years." Aiden considered it. He was lonely, sometimes. He missed rain and pine trees and food with actual flavor. Yet he was happy. "I'm okay," he said, and he meant it. "It's weird and frustrating, but also incredible. I'm learning things beyond my wildest dreams, and I have to teach these aliens that our deadliest feature is something other than our claws or teeth." "Oh yeah, what is it?" Aiden grinned. "Our baffling, infuriating, and completely unpredictable politeness." Alina laughed again, and for a few minutes, surrounded by the glow of an alien flower, it was just a brother talking to a sister. Tella stood before Professor Vor's desk, her posture rigid. His office was a chamber of living wood. Symbiotic mosses covered the walls, regulating humidity and casting a cool green light. Natural ledgers held fossilized texts and etched protein wafers. The air was cool and still. Professor Vor sat behind a massive slab of petrified wood, his form seeming less an occupant than a natural part of its geology. He was examining a delicate fossilized fern. "Report," he creaked, his gaze on the fossil. "The follow-up experiments yielded unexpected results, Professor," Tella began. She placed her note cord on the desk and activated its projector. A complex web of data filled the air, graphs of Aiden's stable heart rate, charts of his negligible adrenaline response, and clips of him disposing of the synth steak and returning the textbook. I presented him with a high-value food resource. He discarded it. I simulated a physical threat. He offered assistance. I sabotaged his research. He calmly repaired the damage, she summarized, frustration evident in the clicking of her vocalizer plates. Every stimulus designed to provoke an instinctual, apex predator response he met with social placation or indifference. The data is a mess. He is a biological paradox. Professor Vor looked up, his ancient eyes fixed on her. A long moment passed. "You have been thorough, Student Novin," he said slowly. "Your methodology is sound, your observations clinical. Your conclusion, however, rests on a flawed premise." "Flawed? Professor, the data conflicts with every known behavioral model for his species type." "Precisely," Vor agreed. He gestured at the hologram. "You have spent weeks measuring the predator's response to another predator. You showed him the Gralnax. You presented yourself as a rival, a saboteur. You have tried to provoke the beast." He leaned forward, the movement causing a faint creak. "And you have found a void in the data, because you are measuring the wrong variable." Tella tilted her head. "Please clarify, Professor." "You measured the predator's response to another predator," he repeated, his voice imbued with the weight of a lesson. "Now measure the human's response to a member of his pack." The statement settled into the quiet room. A member of his pack. The concept was alien. Humans were solitary predators. The texts were clear. A pack was a cooperative hunting unit. The term felt incongruous. And yet, Professor Vor chose his words with geological care. "Pack," Tella repeated. Her mind raced, recontextualizing her observations, the wave in the cafeteria, the offer of help, the calm repair. What if he was a social animal? The implications were staggering. It would mean she had built her entire thesis on a false premise. A tremor of fear and exhilaration passed through her. "I see," she said, though the full picture remained elusive, but a new hypothesis was forming in the chaotic mess of her data. Faint, fragile, and contrary to established science, but it was there. "Good," creaked Professor Vor, returning his attention to his fossil. "Then your work continues." Tella bowed her head and left the chamber. Her mind was wrestling with a single revolutionary idea. Measure his response to a member of his pack. Tella's methodology shifted. She put away her bioscanner and stimuli. Her new tool was distance, cataloging Aiden's interactions as behaviors to understand, not data points to measure. Her first significant observation took place in a public commons. Aiden was sitting with Grish, the 8-foot-tall briar pelt. Grish was staring at his note recorder, his broad face scrunched in confusion. "The humor escapes me," Grish rumbled, his voice like dry leaves on stone. "The avian creature traverses the pathway to arrive at the opposite side. It is a simple statement of logistics. Why is it a joke?" Aidan leaned back, a smile on his lips. Tella, observing from behind a potted plant, leaned in, recording the conversation. "Okay, see, the humor is in the setup, not the answer," Aidan explained patiently. "You're expecting a clever punchline, but you just get the most boring, literal answer possible. It's subverting your expectations." Grish pondered this. So the joke is that it is a non-joke? Exactly, Aiden said, snapping his fingers. You got it. It's funny because it's stupid. A slow, rumbling sound started deep in Grish's chest, growing into a full-bodied, wheezing cough. It is funny because it is stupid, he boomed, slapping his furry knee. Oh, the logistics are the humour. I comprehend. Aiden laughed with him. Tella watched, analysing. He expended time to explain an abstract concept for mutual enjoyment. He created a positive social bond. It was cooperative. Her next observation was in the university's greenhouse. He tended a bed of Martian phantom orchids, carefully missing their aerial roots. Another student, a small four-legged creature with a silicate shell, was struggling to reach a nutrient canister on a high shelf. Aidan noticed. He walked over, retrieved the canister, and handed it to the smallest student. The student emitted a series of grateful high-pitched chirps. Aidan just nodded, smiled, and returned to the orchids. Tella made a note. Subject performed a spontaneous act of aid for a member of a different species. Altruistic. Motive appears to be helpfulness. The word felt strange, unscientific, yet uniquely fitting. A new picture of the human formed. The data pointed to a conclusion so radical it felt like heresy, but the evidence was mounting. Perhaps the human's defining characteristic was empathy. The engineering lab hummed with students working on midterm projects. The assignment was to construct a functional miniature starship drive. Grish sat hunched over his workbench, a gentle, furry mountain of frustration. His project, the tiny drive, lay before him under a magnifier. His mind understood the theory. His body presented the challenge. His large, powerful paws covered in mossy fur and ending in claws designed for climbing were clumsy with the standard issue tweezers. He'd spent an hour trying to place one component, a sliver of conductive material, into a port less than a millimeter wide. Every time he managed to pick it up, a twitch of his massive forearm sent it skittering away. Sigh. The sound was a deep, mournful gust. He would fail. He rested his furry head on the workbench, the tiny starship drive mocking him from beneath the magnifier. He noticed Aiden cross only when the human stood beside him. Hey, Grish, Aiden said. Rough go? Grish lifted his head, his gentle eyes full of woe. The components are fine, he rumbled, gesturing with a claw 10 times their size. My manipulators are suboptimal. Aiden leaned in, studying the problem. The tiny drive, the standard tweezers, Grish's massive paws. He narrowed his eyes, an engineering problem, and Aiden loved those. Hang on, Aiden said. I think I've got something. He unzipped a side pocket of his satchel. Tella, observing from across the lab, watched with keen interest. She'd expected verbal encouragement, a fascinating social ritual. The tools surprised her. Aiden's hand emerged holding 2 items. One was a pair of long-nosed forceps, more slender than the university-issue ones. The other was a roll of dark grey fabric. What is that? Grish asked, his leafy scent intensifying. The forceps are from my microhydroponics array. The wrap, Aiden grinned, is the most useful thing in the universe. My dad calls it utility wrap. High friction, peels off clean. You can fix almost anything with it. Aiden took the forceps and a strip of the wrap. Okay, here's the issue, he explained. These handles are for human hands. Thin, 5-fingered grips. Your claws can't get a proper hold. He wrapped the handles of the forceps with the tacky material, building them up layer by layer. He worked with a sureness that spoke of years of tinkering, shaping the material into thick, grooved cylinders. The trick, Aiden continued, is to adapt the tool to the user. We just need to give you a handle you can actually handle. He added a few more layers, then held the modified tool out. The slender handles were now thick pillars of wrap, with indentations perfectly spaced for Grish's 3 large claws. Try that, Aiden said. Grish took the forceps. His claws settled into the custom-made grooves. The fit was perfect. The tool felt like an extension of his own body. He leaned over the magnifier, his movements slow but confident. He maneuvered the forceps, picking up the conductive sliver on the first try, and with surprising steadiness, slotted it into its port. It clicked into place. A deep, joyful rumble emanated from Grish's chest. "It is stable!" he whispered in awe. He looked at Aiden, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You have fixed my hands." "Nah," Aiden said with a shrug, putting his wrap away. "Your hands were fine. You just had the wrong software." He gave Grish a friendly pat on his massive shoulder. "You got this. Let me know if you need to borrow the universal adapter again." From across the room, Tella lowered her note recorder, her internal filament softening to a contemplative glow. She had just witnessed a definitive act. The human identified a problem, engineered a unique solution, and provided aid. This marked him as a social creature, a collaborator. Her old thesis was a diametric opposite of the truth. The university library archives were a sanctuary of silence. Tella was in a deep section when the universe provided one final, terrifyingly practical experiment. It began with a flicker. The lights overhead stuttered and died, plunging the aisle into twilight. A low hum vibrated up through the floor, followed by a wailing alarm. "Power regulation overload detected in Sector Gamma 9. Containment protocols engaged." The calm, synthesized voice was terrifying. Tella knew it meant the section was now a Faraday cage, designed to protect the archives from a catastrophic energy spike. Before she could process the thought, a sound like grinding stone echoed from both ends of the corridor. With a deafening clank, two massive blast doors of solid composite alloy slammed shut, sealing the section. The emergency strips flickered and went out. Absolute darkness. The alarms cut off. The humming ceased. The silence was so absolute her circulatory pump sounded like a drum. Tella's first reaction was analytical. Containment successful. I am in a sealed environment. Oxygen is finite. Her second reaction was a cold spike of fear. Her instincts, inherited from a billion years of ancestors, screamed. Trapped. Confined. Cage. Her internal filaments flared with red light. An irrational pressure emanated from the walls. She fought to control her breathing, the sound harsh in the silence. She was a scientist. She would solve this problem. She extended her limbs, feeling her way until she touched the cold, unyielding blast door. It was perfectly smooth, seamless. She pressed her auditory senses against the metal. The only sound was the thumping of her own circulatory pump. Aiden was just outside the sealed sector when the alarms blared. Library security drones had herded him and other students back, cordoning off the area with hard light barriers. Urgent, managed activity filled the main reading room. "It's a full system failure in the primary conduit," one official said. "The whole archive sector is on lockdown. It'll take hours for an engineering crew to manually override the doors." "Any students inside?" another asked. "Scanners show 4 life signs, maybe 5. The surge is playing hell with the sensors." 4 or 5 students, trapped, a knot tightened in Aiden's stomach. He knew ours was optimistic. He pulled out his note recorder and accessed the library's HVAC schematic. He zoomed in on the archive sector, tracing power lines, supports, ventilation systems, and then he found it. The schematic showed a narrow maintenance vent flushed against the wall next to the blast door. The manual release for a sealed sector had to be right behind it. The vent for diagnostic microdrones was too small for a person, barely 20 centimeters square, but it was an opening. An audacious plan, likely against a dozen regulations, formed in his mind. He slipped away from the crowd and made his way to the blast door. He ran his hand along the wall, finding the vent cover's faint outline. Strong magnetic clips held it in place. He looked from the cover to the sealed door, then thought of the people trapped inside. He slung his satchel off his shoulder, setting it on the floor. He reached for the flexible metal strap. With a deft twist, Aiden unhooked the strap. The strap, a meter-and-a-half long, woven metallic alloy he couldn't identify, was light, ridiculously strong and flexible. He'd used it for everything from a tow rope to a tourniquet. Today it would be a pry bar.
He slid the strap's flat end into the seam of the vent cover. It required more leverage than his hands could provide. He wedged the strap deep and twisted his wrist sharply. The metal groaned but held. With a loud pop, a magnetic clip disengaged. He worked the strap around the edge, popping the other clips. The heavy cover came loose and he set it silently on the floor. He peered into the vent, a dark, narrow tunnel. At the far end he could just make out the faint green glow of the manual release panel. Too small to crawl through, he just needed to reach it. He took a deep breath. This had to be exact. He referenced the schematic on his notecorder one last time, memorizing the layout. To trigger the override, he had to bridge two specific contacts, the primary power input and the emergency release actuator, about 10 centimeters apart. He held the metal strap like a foil, feeding it into the vent. He fixed his gaze on the faint green glow at the other end, operating by feel and memory. He prodded the wall until the tip met the panel's indentation. He angled the strap, bracing his arm. He felt the faint magnetic pull of the circuits. He nudged it left. The tip caught the first contact. Now the second. He lowered the strap, pivoting it slightly. He held his breath, adjusting his angle by a fraction of a millimeter. A bright blue spark erupted from the far end, followed by a sharp crack. The lights in the main reading room flickered violently. Then, with a long hiss of equalizing pressure, the massive blast door moved. A deep groan echoed as the meter-thick slab retracted into the wall. Aiden pulled his strap back out of the vent as security drones whizzed over. He reattached it to his satchel and slung it over his shoulders as a new siren wailed from the main hall. He planned to leave before armored sentinels arrived. The door stood open, a rectangle of darkness. He stepped over the hard light barrier and walked into the unlit archive. Aiden stepped into profound darkness. The noise and light cut off behind him. The air was still and cold. He paused, letting his eyes adjust. The doorway cast his long, distorted shadow down the aisle. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone in here?" A faint scraping sound answered from the far end. He squinted and resolved the shape. It was tall and slender, unmistakably Tella. She stood beside the other blast door, a broken piece of metal shelving clutched in her hand, having tried to pry the door open. The emergency lights flickered back to life with a weak, pulsing orange glow, casting her in stark silhouettes. Her elegant form, usually a picture of composure, looked jagged and vulnerable. A fine layer of dust coated her plating. For a moment, they just stood there, separated by 20 meters of shadow. He sought the right words and found them in simplicity. She was someone trapped in the dark, now free. He walked towards her, his footsteps echoing. He stood a few feet away, a comforting presence. He extended a hand, palm open, a gesture so simple, so fundamentally human, its meaning was universal. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quiet. Tella looked from his outstretched hand to his face. The pulsing light caught the worried expression in his eyes. He put aside analysis. He was simply asking. In that moment, Professor Vor's words echoed, coalescing into perfect clarity. "Measure the human's response to a member of his pack." This was it. Reality. Beyond experiments. A member of the pack was in distress, and the human had come. He met the crisis with thought, engineering a rescue. Her articulated vocalizer plates relaxed slightly. Hesitantly, she reached out with one of her slender, three-fingered hands and took his. Her touch was cool and smooth, like polished stone. It was warm and soft. The contact was strange, alien, and yet it was the most reassuring thing in the galaxy. 2 days later, Xenobiology 201 was in session. The amphitheater buzzed with chatter. The story of the archive lockdown had spread. The official report cited a system reset caused by the initial power surge, a conclusion that satisfied only the administration. Professor Vor stood at his usual spot. "Today," he creaked, We will have a presentation from a student, a revision of a previously submitted thesis. Student Novan, the floor is yours. Tella rose and walked to the center of the floor. She moved with a new, quiet confidence. She activated the holographic projector. Instead of the Gralnax, a title appeared. Dominance Through Cooperation. A study of human as a social apex. A murmur passed through the room. Aiden's eyebrows shot up. Tella met his gaze for a fraction of a second before she spoke. My previous hypothesis, she began, her voice clear, posited that territorial aggression primarily drives solitary apex predators from high-gravity worlds, such as the human. I base this on established biological models and textual research. She paused. This hypothesis was wrong, fundamentally and completely. The admission silenced the class. For a student of Tella's caliber, such a retraction was unprecedented. My initial experiments failed because my premise was flawed, she continued. I was attempting to measure a feline response from a canine subject. To use an archaic Terran analogy, I was searching for the aggression of the individual when I should have been observing the strength of the pack. The hologram shifted, showing a clip of Aiden in the engineering lab, wrapping Grisha's forceps. Another showed him handling the nutrient canister to the student in the greenhouse. The final piece was a schematic of the library's blast door, the manual release and service vent highlighted in red. My revised thesis is this. Humans achieve dominance through proactive, mutualistic problem solving. They derive their apex status from their instinct to cooperate and create. An instinct more powerful than their ability to kill. They are the ultimate pack hunters, and their pack is everyone. She gestured to the footage of Aidan and Grish. Primary evidence A. The subject, Aidan Cross, observed a fellow student struggling. He offered a solution, showing empathy over mockery. He identified the core of the problem, tool incompatibility, and engineered a novel solution. He empowered the student, an act of support rather than substitution. Her gaze swept the room. The conclusion is clear. The human's greatest biological weapon is ingenuity, applied in the service of others. Their instinct is to share knowledge. Their response to a challenge is to analyze it, deconstruct it, and find a clever way around it. Their strength is a function of an instinct for mutualistic support, which surpasses aggression. She turned off the hologram. I formally retract my previous paper, she stated, her voice ringing with conviction. The human is the most dangerous creature we have encountered, because it will, with calm resolve, turn any monster's cage into a door and invite you to walk through it. And more, it will help you do the same. She finished and walked back to her seat in absolute silence. Then a slow, grating sound broke the quiet. It was Professor Vore, clapping his heavy wooden hands together. The sound was like two ancient logs striking one another. One by one, the other students joined in, a cacophony of clicks, trills, and thumps. Aiden just sat there, a slow smile spreading across his face. Warmth bloomed in his chest, recognition for the first time since he's arrived. Someone had truly seen him. That evening, Aiden was in the study lounge cramming floral genetics when Tella approached his table. She moved with a slight hesitation, a new quality. Cross, she said, her tone formal but lacking its clinical edge. Tella, he replied, looking up. Or should I say student Novan? That was some presentation. You're going to make me blush. A faint hum emanated from her chest. The data was conclusive. I merely reported it. She paused. I wish to apologize for my previous methods. My unsanctioned experiments were an intrusion. They were methodologically unsound. Aiden waved a hand. Hey, all's well. Having someone try to startle me with a textbook was weird, but I've had worse roommates. We're good. Her posture relaxed slightly. Good, she repeated. The resolution of our conflict is efficient? He laughed. Sure, Tella. Efficient. They stood in silence. It was clear she had something else to say. In my research for my revised thesis, she began, I accessed the human cultural archives. I was searching for further examples of your species' approach to apex predators. I discovered a piece of media, a historical document from the late 20th century. A movie? Aiden guessed. Affirmative. Its title is Jaws. I have several questions. I was hoping you could explicate. Aiden stared at her, then burst out laughing. The idea of Tella, the most literal being he had ever met, trying to pass the cultural impact of a blockbuster monster movie was just too perfect. Explicate Jaws, he said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. How about I show it to you? He glanced over as Grish walked in. Hey, Grish, Aiden called out. You busy? Grish lumbered over. My plan was to review my engineering schematics. Better idea, Aiden said, grinning. Movie night, my dorm. I am introducing Tella to one of Earth's greatest philosophers. Tella's sensory filaments perked up. A philosopher? Kant? Plato? Quint, Aiden said, his face straight. And I'll bring snacks. Aiden's dorm room was small, but he'd made it his own. The Signian bloom pulsed with warm light, and botanical sketches covered the walls. The three of them gathered around his view screen. Tella sat stiffly on a chair. Grish had settled on a large floor cushion, and Aiden was cross-legged on his bed. Between them sat a large bowl of a fluffy white snack. This is popcorn, Aiden had explained. You heat a specific maize kernel until it violently explodes. It's delicious. Grish had tentatively eaten a piece, and his eyes had gone wide. It tastes like a salty cloud, he'd rumbled happily. Tella was still observing her first piece, analyzing its texture. Now the film was playing. On screen, the iconic shark made its grand, terrifying appearance. The enormous two-note score filled the room. Grish, despite being 8 feet tall, let out a small whimper and covered his eyes with his massive paws. Tella, however, leaned forward, her lenses wide with focus. Fascinating, she whispered. Its territorial motivations are so straightforward. A biological machine operating on a single directive. Consume and control. Pretty much, Aiden agreed, tossing popcorn into his mouth. And the human's response, she continued, is to hunt the hunter, yet they approach it as a unit. They form a pack, the scientist, the law enforcement officer, and the philosopher. That's one word for him, Aiden chuckled. On screen, Quint scraped his fingernails down a chalkboard. Grish flinched. Tella tilted her head. A sonic deterrent? An annoyance, Aiden corrected. A very human form of threat display. They watched in comfortable silence. The movie's score punctuated by Grish's soft crunching. The light flickered across their faces. One human, one Orphean, one Briarpalt. 3 beings from 3 worlds, brought together by curiosity and a willingness to look past their assumptions. Tella picked up her piece of popcorn. She examined it, then placed it in her mouth. She made a soft, thoughtful clicking sound. Aiden looked over at her, a smile on his face. So? She finished chewing, her expression unreadable. The structural failure upon mastication is satisfying, she stated, with the gravity of a scientist announcing a major discovery. She reached into the bowl and took another piece. Aiden just smiled, passing the bowl closer to her. He leaned back against his pillow. He was still a specimen, an anomaly. But tonight, surrounded by his new, strange and wonderful friends, he was part of a pack.